And I'm sure, you know, way too. Anyway, he said, he says, yeah, Doc, I want you to let her not sleep.
Before you can get on to my heart. Well, I got a
That's
That's all
5
right.
minutes, I hope.
Oh, you're good.
No. Yeah. Please, this Texas, they're stuck on traffic on 385 as a record. It's also stopped at Chrissy Reeves.
This was years ago before.
Paige teaches nursery with Chrissy.
Right.
So I asked Jackie, because I don't believe your mom's gonna help Jackie. So they get here, I'm gonna babysit this class till he gets here.
Well, we do have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. You're not ready at all. I read the lesson.
It's scary.
Well, you'll be fine. We'll see.
I got a B.
Huh?
Just trying to punt.
Well, I'm filling in for hopefully just a couple of minutes. I thought about bringing up some of the stuff from nursery, maybe working on that.
So that did not help matters at all.
Yes.
No.
Okay, I'll call you there.
And
I'm gonna put that in the market. They say they make market.
And so's Chrissy and Jacob.
Yeah, but we need a page for you, don't we? Leave.
Yeah, and Paige and Chrissy are the nursery people.
Oh,
So Yvonne's down there with Jackie.
okay. I was gonna say I could.
See, that's easier to fill in than sure.
Big star. There you go. What you doing?
Hope you read your lesson.
I did, but you want some, ooh, this ought to think about something.
and then lots of games today. But I'm still trying. Well, I got it in the library. My mother-in-law tried to teach me a long time ago, but I could get on listening. If you don't sit there and do it for an hour, and then you finish, so you want to train on her. Yes. Yes, so I got books and I watched YouTube.
Yeah.
Yes. She crocheted and not knitting.
This is where you're from, right?
I don't know.
Southern part? Around LA or San Diego?
I think the whole, was the,
That's
the one that was like inspired me. That's why I don't talk with it.
He's got
Paper, I think.
I got it.
We're gonna find this
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
There's snow skiing in the morning.
Out there.
Surfing in the afternoon, you know? Like, man. Oh, really? Wow. I've never been to the West Coast. I mean, I've never So you think you could have escaped from Alcatraz?
guess I've talked to him that much. Yes.
What I went for.
My parents always say you have to prepare like an hour beforehand.
I was there at 5:30 last They all came out
Yeah, he said it's just enough time. Just said I grabbed the laptop and set it down and got out of the house. It
Lee, would you say a prayer for us? I had that part down. Did you? Oh, everything okay? I know. We like each other. All right, you got it. South Dakota.
Yes, okay. I'm sure they're up to speed on it.
That's one of those things that it's a nightmare, but then you listen to it.
That was nice.
You have to take care of it. It's a nightmare. Ended up doing cabinets and this is the
Fox small one.
It does? First guy I think I'm
He's feeling a little better. He's feeling a little better. In that private room. Y'all make it late.
Tennessee.
What's that?
Oh no, he's doing computers tonight. And digital analog.
What's wrong, class?
Nothing else in my
Mistake then.
Sorry, I was running a little late,
Vastly different than what
but they are playing bumper cars on the interstate tonight. More than one place. We are on chapter 10. Chapter 10. And since Brian was all geared up and ready to go, I'm gonna ask him if he would lead us in our opening prayer.
Almighty God, we are so thankful that you have once again granted us this day that we were able to enjoy, and hopefully, Lord, that we're able to bring glory and honor to your name. Father, we're thankful for everything in the world that you have created. We're thankful that you have given us plenty of evidence to show that you were the builder, you are the designer. And help us, Lord, to continually look at this evidence and increase our faith. Help us as we go through this study to continue to keep an open mind, to continue to look at in detail, Lord, how you have made things so wondrously. And these things we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
I am not by any stretch a biology major, an expert in any of these things in the any stretch of the imagination. But we're gonna get through it. We're gonna do the best we can, and hopefully we can learn some things from it. Take a kind of a common sense approach to some of these things. But there's no doubt some of the things that he mentioned in this lesson just right over the top of my head. And maybe y'all can explain them to me. Hope so. But we're on chapter 10, talking about information and how this idea of information fits into intelligent design. Now, a lot of this is biology that we're going to be talking about, and I guess you would even be qualified as microbiology, real small stuff. And I'm gonna go ahead and tell this. I send my kids jokes every once in a while. I send them a text with the dad jokes, and I get the rolling eyes and all that kind of stuff in a response. But I told them that I'd got a chance to meet my first microbiologist the other day. He's a lot bigger than I thought he'd be. About the same response I got. We know, as we've been studying this intelligent design, if something has a design to it, then by necessity it has to have a designer. It's just that simple. If something is designed, then there had to be some kind of intelligent being that designed it. We've been talking about that for a few weeks now. If we look at something like the Empire State Building here, we can look at that and we can know that somebody didn't just back in there and dump a bunch of concrete, dump out a bunch of steel and glass, and this is what popped up out of that pile of rubble. We know when we look at something like that, that it has a design to it, okay? And it has an incredible design to it. You know, we know that there were blueprints that had to be drawn. No telling how much study and work went into the design just of this one building, so that it would be able to stand the stresses of all the weight, and wind, and everything else that's going to be put on it. So when we look at something that complicated, we understand design. Same thing with our universe. We look at our universe and we can understand from the complicated nature of it, but the organization of it, and how well it fits together, how well it works, that it has a design to it. And by necessity, if it has a design, then it has a designer. Any comments from anybody so far? Okay, we've talked about that example of the pocket watch a few times before. You know, you can't just go out and throw a pile of little gears out there and expect to be able to tell time from that, can you? All those little micro gears laying there on the table in a pile, they don't do any good. The only way that they're going to be able to do any good is if they are assembled in the proper sequence, in the proper order, in the proper place, as they were designed by their designer. And once you get that in the proper sequence, then it will be able to accomplish its purpose. Once it's put together like the designer intended, it accomplishes all those individual parts, its purpose of being able to tell time. So again, we see that design. Now, we've looked at so far an incredible amount of design in our universe, just an incredible amount of it. And this design, to us as Christians, really shouldn't come as a surprise. It shouldn't come as a surprise to us because we understand that there is a designer. We understand what the Hebrew writer wrote about 2,000 years ago in Hebrews 3 and verse 4, where he says, "For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God." So we have God as the builder, the creator, the designer, and the power behind this universe in which we live. Any comments from anybody?
You know, all those gears you had there, would that be an example of, what's that word, irreducible complexity? Where they're just by themselves, they can't do the job. Once you get them in the right sequence, and they have to all be there, then it can do the job. Is that what that?
But irreducible complexity, once they're put together,
Uh-huh.
you can't take one out and it still work.
And that would be the case there too.
Yeah, you can't take one out, that's irreducible complexity. Missing one part causes it not to function, which means it could not have evolved. Because evolution means that, by definition, it had to be missing some parts to start with. Anything else? Okay? Just kind of a quick recap. We've looked at design in our solar system. We spent a little bit of time on that in the last couple of weeks. We saw design in the Earth's atmosphere, about how opaque it is. It's just the right transparency for us to be able to exist. We talked about the Earth's water cycle, the rain and the circulation from the oceans, the perfect balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide and things like this in the air. Carrie's been talking about on Sunday mornings the design of the human body, how we can see that the human body is designed from the eyes to the nose, the ears, the hands, all the way down to our toes, and even down to the cellular level. We see design in the human body. Now, as we begin chapter 10, we're going to be looking at the role of information in this idea of intelligent design. And you may not always immediately recognize what that means, and I didn't, just reading information in the start of it. But there is information included in God's design, okay? And when we have information, by necessity, we have to have an intelligent source for that information. Information never comes from something that's inanimate, that's something that does not have a mental capacity. You can't take a rock and that rock tell you something in and of itself. It's inanimate. It doesn't have any mental capacity. So the information we see in the universe can always be traced back to an intelligent source. It can always be traced back to that intelligent source. Any comments or questions before we go on? All right, the author comes up with an example of some rocks that are laying around just kind of randomly in a backyard. Okay, I think that's on what's the first page? 129 of the lesson book. On the first page of this lesson, it comes up with this idea of this random order of rocks just laying around the backyard. If you went out and you saw this random order of rocks, you wouldn't think anything of it too much. You wouldn't think anything about them being placed there for any particular order. You wouldn't think of any kind of information coming from something like that. It's just a random order. But he said if somebody were to take and arrange those rocks in such a way that they spelled out a phrase, and then we would look at that and say, you know what? Somebody had to do that. There had to have been some type of intelligent force behind that to create that phrase out of those rocks. In other words, those rocks would be giving us information. Of course, the phrase that he used there was Eric Parker, who's the author of our book. Eric Parker is the best preacher and writer in the world. He said, highly unlikely. He said, if you saw that, you knew that somebody had taken the time to do that. Some intelligent source had taken time to put those in that order in order to convey a message or in order to convey information. Now, let's look at another example. Maybe one that might help us a little bit more, helps me a little bit. Say I've got a cup. Okay, in this cup, I've got 6 marbles and 3 blocks. And I shake that cup up and I pour it out on a tabletop. But when I do that, I wind up kind of a random order of marbles and blocks. I can pick them all up and I can shake them up again. I can pour them out on the table again. They're not going to look like that, are they? They're going to come out differently. I can do that probably 1,000,000 times and never come up with that exact order. It's completely random. I can't learn anything from that. There's no message, there's nothing to be conveyed from that. But if you were to come into that table a little bit later on, and you were to see these same marbles and blocks arranged a little differently, if you saw them in that design, in that perfect order, would you think that happened randomly?
No.
That's not gonna happen randomly, is it? I don't care how many times you shake that cup up and pour them out. That exact design is not gonna happen. So how did that come about?
Someone set them there like that.
Somebody had to put them there, didn't he? Some intelligent mind had to take the time to set them in that order, to put them in that design. So we can see intelligence just from that design, can't we? We can see intelligence from the order there, can't we? We know that there had to be an intelligent being behind that. Now, this is similar to what we have and what we've been talking about with our intelligent design being behind creation. When we look at the universe, we see the order of the things in the universe, and we begin to see the design of the universe. And because of that, we recognize that there had to be an intelligence behind it. But you know, not only do we see this design, but we see information. Just raise your hands. Does anybody see information in that? Got 1, 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. See some information there? If we do this, anybody see any information there?
SOS.
Exactly. It conveys information, doesn't it? Dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. Well, that's the SOS, which I think all of us are familiar with that, aren't we? We know a little bit about Morse code. If you know anything about Morse code, you'll know that, okay? That is the international symbol or the international code for distress in Morse code. Dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. So what do we see here? Not only do we see design, but we see information. Okay? Here we've got both of those right there. We have design and information contained in that design. And that's what we see a lot in our universe. Okay? That's what we're going to see a lot of as we begin to go through some of this lesson, especially when we get to this idea of DNA. There's a lot of information contained in the code of DNA. Any comments or questions, anybody? Okay. Now, we know when we have design, it has to have a designer. When we have information, it has to have an intelligent being behind it in order to convey that information. It wants to convey that information. So, the author also mentions here on page 129, just kind of a side note here, that a lot of those who believe in this basic theory of evolution, okay, that we came out of some kind of primordial soup, that we came out of something, just minerals mixed together without God acting on it anyway. That they accuse us of seeing design in everything because we already believe everything is designed. Okay? And they're right from the standpoint that we already believe everything is designed. But that's not why we necessarily see design in everything. Sometimes the design is just evident. It's just evident. The author says there towards the bottom of the page, he says, however, one can reasonably deduce and detect design because it is evident when you have a number of separate components interacting in such a way as to intelligently accomplish a function beyond the scope of those individual components. So what you've got, a bunch of components. In and of themselves, they can't do anything. Remember the pile of watch gears, they're not gonna do anything. But when they're assembled together as designed, then they're able to accomplish a purpose. And that's what we see here when we see design. It's able to accomplish a purpose with these things. Any comments before we move on?
Well, they're right though, because we do see design and evidence, because everything does have design evidence behind it. I mean, even the rock you're talking about, the minerals in the rock.
Right.
And there's design. And we're always catching up. I mean, just this last century, we learned about, they broke the code on DNA, but it's so complex. It's a major amount of study. We're catching up. That's been there since time started.
The guys who actually discovered DNA, their discovery, their proclamation was, well, here's proof that there is no God. And as they begin to dig further into it, it just was more confirmation that there is a God because of the design of it and because of the information that it translates. So anybody that would look objectively at the information, they would see the design. Okay? They admit to seeing it in the prosthetic hands, they admit to seeing it in the watch, but they don't admit to seeing it in the universe, many of them, because they don't want the accountability that comes along with that. And even those who do say that there must be some kind of supernatural function behind this, supernatural starting of it, many of them still want to reject the God of the Bible because of the accountability that comes along with that. Any other comments or questions? Okay. The author also references Dr. Werner Gitt. Okay, he mentions him, and he's the one that wrote the book, In the Beginning Was Information. Now, I don't think that is he's not trying to make a slight at God there, but he is saying that information was present from the very beginning of the universe, and in a sense it was because God created the information that put our universe together. But he says that he lists off about 30 different aspects of information that dismiss the possibility of information originating from just a purely materialistic process. That idea of materialistic process is just evolution, what he's talking about there. He said he runs off about 30 of them. He lists about 7 of them for us, and we'll talk about 5 of those. 2 of those are some of that stuff that just went right over there. But I think 5 of them we'll see get caught back up here. 5 of them we'll look at that make sense to us. The first one he lists off is there can be no information without a code. Okay? There's no way to transmit information without a code or a language. Okay? We might think of that idea of code as a language. Or something like Morse code, which in a sense is a language. It's a way to transmit information. But if we don't have a way to transmit it, if we don't have a code, we don't have a language, then we don't have the information. It's impossible to transmit it. He also mentions that any code is the result of a free and deliberate convention. Okay? And this idea here, I think, is that this idea of a free and deliberate convention is there must be a mutual understanding of the code. Okay? This idea of a convention of people getting together and deciding that that's what it's going to be. When we talked about the SOS a while ago, before around 1900, there were a lot of different signals that people would send out that was basically a distress signal. And it was confusing. You get different dashes and dots from different people, and so what they finally did is they had a convention in 1906 in which the world got together and decided that ... dash 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 ... was going to be the distress signal. So that convention, in other words, you had a group of people get together and they decided that's going to be the code. That's going to be the code for distress. So I think what we're talking about here, that this code is a result of a free and deliberate convention. people getting together, or at least two sides getting together in order to have this code. It must be understood actually by more than one. Any comments over any of that so far? Okay. There can be no information without a sender. It's got to come from somebody. Okay? The information, in order for it to be translated and useful, has to come from somebody. It has to have an originator. If there's no originator, there's no sender, then the information's not there, basically. And any given chain of information points to a mental source. If you've got a set of information, it had to come from a mind. Okay? Somebody had to sit down, they had to think this up, and then they had to put this information out there for others to use. Okay? So it has to come from a mental source. In other words, it didn't come from a rock. Okay? It didn't come from a tree. Although a tree is a living being, it has no mentality. It doesn't have a brain. So it has to come from a mental source. And finally, there can be no information without volition. Now, this is the idea that this information is put out there voluntarily with intention. Okay? So we have information that's put out intentionally. So this is some things that he came up with here that go along with this idea of information and how information has to come from somebody with a mentality able to understand it. They put it out on purpose, and it's something that can be understood by someone else or by something else. And when we get down to the DNA and the code in the DNA, the other parts of the DNA, and actually the DNA itself, understands that code. Okay? So it's not a code that's not understood by someone. Any other comments or questions from anybody? Y'all speak up at once. He also adds this, Dr. Werner Gitt, that this idea of an information storage system. An information storage system is a telltale giveaway of intelligent design. If you've got a way to save it, you've got information and you've got a way to save it. Of course, you know, we deal with computers and things like that all the time. You get the little thumb drive, you can save information on a thumb drive. But the biggest way that we save information is how? The brain. That is the best information storage facility that there ever was, is our brain.
It's just made up of matter.
It's made up of matter. It's amazing, isn't it? Amazing what God was able to do. Any other comments? Okay. Well, our bodies are pre-programmed with absolutely an amazing amount of information. And we're equipped with this amazing amount of information storage space. There on page 131, he says the amount of information processing events occurring daily in the human body is 3 times 10 to the 24th, which is 1,000,000 times more than all the human knowledge stored in the libraries all around the world. The amount of information that our bodies process every day, 3 times 10 to the 24th. I know that's 10 with 24 zeros after it. Multiply times 3. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. It's 1,000,000 times more than all the human knowledge in the books that we have stored in all the libraries around the world. That's a huge amount of information that is being processed in our bodies. To think that people think that this was just by some accident. We can see God's design in this, and that's when he put up this little chart. And most of this stuff I don't know what it is, but if we look at it, I wish the letters were a little bit bigger on it. It starts off right there in the middle with 1 byte, or 1 bit, excuse me, 1 bit. Now we're talks about one bit, you get back down to the computer, the binary, the ones and the zeros. One bit is just one of those, okay? And that's the smallest amount of information he has on here. And as this thing unwinds, let me see if I can look at it a little bit closer here. You see how much information that there is as you come around to, 1 minute of piano playing, and it goes on around, to the amount of information that's contained in the Bible. The Bible, he says, up there has 3,566 letters in it. So we're beginning to come up with quite a bit of information. And you can come back around, all the way back around here to the information contained in the Library of Congress, which is 10 to the 13th. 10 to the 13th. But when you get all the way around over here by itself, far beyond any of the rest of them, the daily information that flows in the human body. That is absolutely amazing, the amount of information that's going on, even when we're not even thinking about it. Our body's just sitting at rest. That information is still processing in our bodies. Any comments or questions over that from anybody?
Look at that information on just the human vision. Hearing, we all don't hear the same.
Right.
But some can hear 3, 4 octaves up, and it's a pitch that's unbelievable. Some can pick that up, some cannot. But that's what the brain is processing. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, all the time. I think that may have been on here. The human ear is around here. Yeah, just in 1 second. What it hears in 1 second is right there. And it's amazing the amount of information.
And those, like the COBOL compiler and Fortran compiler, that's really large computer systems.
Right.
Big time. I mean, way past anything I can ever look at. And my son-in-law works with them. And in the ear, 1 second does the same amount of information they can do.
Right. It is absolutely amazing, the body that God has given us.
It's amazing, the man that counted all that.
I'd run out of fingers and toes pretty quick. Anything else? Okay.
I think I got it.
You got it? Got that memorized?
One
Okay.
thing I thought up to, your body works when you sleep. I mean, it's still working to
Right.
keep you alive, and you don't even know it.
Right.
I mean, it's still all the involuntary things your
You
body
don't have
does.
to. It doesn't do it when you're asleep, do you?
Yeah, your body heals itself. You don't think about it. It's amazing. But it just happened.
We got all this information going on in our bodies. It's crazy the amount of it is. But what we're going to do as we go through the rest of this lesson, we're going to look at 5 different biological examples of information programming that we have in the body, and what we're going to do in the storage systems. We'll list them off, one by one. First one we're going to look at is the brain. Then we're going to look at DNA. We're going to look at the cells and the information contained in them, and the molecular machines, and the cilium and the flagellum. We will spend a little time this week and next week going over some of these, and some of the things we're going to find is amazing, absolutely amazing. But this idea that there is information contained in these things means that information had to come from somewhere. Information cannot evolve. Okay, information has to come from another mental source. Let's go ahead and we'll start looking at the brain for tonight. This will probably be all we'll cover because we're starting to run out of time. We'll cover the brain and probably plan on picking up with DNA next week. But the human brain is absolutely an amazing thing. Our brain capacity is one of the things that separates us from the animals around us. There's a lot more than that separates us from it, but that's one of the things. Our brain capacity, it gives us the ability to think, it gives us the ability to reason, to make decisions, and we can make decisions based on past events. things that we remember in our amazing brain. It also gives us the ability, while making those decisions, to project future events with pretty high accuracy. Okay, not that we're prophets, but we can look at some things and figure out, I know what's going to happen if I do that. Okay, say somebody wants to go out here and start up a little bonfire. Okay, they're going to start a little fire maybe in their fire pit, and they go out there and pour a gallon of gasoline on it. I can
Start
tell
fire.
you with pretty much certainty what's going to happen if you throw a match in there. Okay, maybe not exactly, but yeah, you're going to have a problem. Okay, you're going to have those fumes that have rolled out from that have probably rolled out 10 or 15 feet around it. Okay, they're going to ignite. You're going to have a severe fire. You know, we can do things like that. We can look at the situation and pretty well know from experience what's going to happen if I do this and what's going to happen if I do that. We can make decisions based on those type of things. Our brain gives us the ability to create things, to be creative. We've all seen artists that are able to create absolutely amazing things with their hands. All of that starts here. Okay, it all starts with the brain. Look back at some of the statues that they have carved in the past out of granite and out of marble and different things, even when they didn't have power tools, that are absolutely beautiful. You know? Well, all that creativity starts in the brain. Our brain gives us that ability. We have the ability, because of our brain, to distinguish between right and wrong. Our brain gives us that ability. And we also have the ability to weigh our options. Okay? We can weigh our options because of our brain. Just a quick example of that. Somebody cuts me off in traffic. Okay? I'm cut off in traffic. I've got the option at that point of just laying on my horn. Okay? Well, if I begin to weigh my options, somebody's cut me off in traffic, if I lay on that horn, what might happen? Okay? Situation where I don't know for sure, but he might wave at me with some inappropriate hand gestures. Okay? I might get that. He might not do anything at all. Okay?
Might pull a gun on him.
Well, yeah, you know, when we get to the next red light, he might have a fit of road rage and come back and try to damage my car or damage me. You know, you mentioned, hey, it's Memphis. They pull a gun on you, you might get shot. Or he might feel bad about what he did and apologize. Possibilities are slim, and some folks believe in evolution.
You just said we can predict things.
You know, but we can weigh those options because we have the brain that God has given us. It's an amazing thing that He's given us. Its abilities just far exceed all the animals that we share the earth with. And it does so because this is how God designed it. It's absolutely how God designed it. He quotes Carl Sagan here. You know, Carl Sagan's an atheist. He wrote that book, The Cosmos. But in that book, he says the information content of the human brain would fill some 20 million volumes, as many as in the world's largest libraries. The equivalent of 20 million books is inside the heads of every one of us. The brain is a very big place in a very small space. The circuitry of a machine more wonderful than any devised by humans. It makes you wonder how a guy who had that good of an understanding of the human brain and the capacity of the human brain and how far it exceeds the designed machines of human beings is not designed for just an accident. But that's the way he thought. But this idea of the capacity of our human brain, the equivalent of 20 million books inside of each one of our heads, you know, that's a crazy statistic there. Any comments or questions from anybody? Okay. Not only does our brain have this great ability to store information, but it comes pre-programmed with some information too. Just a couple of just real quick ones. He didn't touch on much of this on the brain. He went over the brain pretty quick. But just a couple of things I happen to think about. We have a quote from the SciPost magazine, an article from SciPost magazine. And the headline of it is "The Brain Pre-Programmed to Know the Difference Between Night and Day." They've done a study on newborns and figured out that the brain didn't have to learn the difference between night and day. They came into this world knowing the difference between night and day. That might mean that some of these kids are just ornery that don't want to sleep all day. But I definitely had one I thought didn't know the difference. You know, but they were pre-programmed with that. Another article from Science Daily. The headline was "Humans are born with brains pre-wired to see words." Pre-wired to see words. It's kind of an interesting article. We'll take time to read it. It's from October 22 of 2020. We'll run out of time, so we won't get into it. But have you ever wondered who taught the baby to cry? When the baby learned to cry? Came into this world knowing how to cry, didn't it? More than likely, one of the very first things under normal circumstances that a baby does is it cries. Why it cries? Who taught it to cry when it's hungry? Who taught it to cry when it needs to be changed, when it's uncomfortable? You know, this is information that's pre-programmed in that baby's brain, in that child's brain. Who taught it? Who taught the brain how to move the hands and the feet? Now, they may not be able to get up and walk around and carry on like that, but they do move their hands and feet. And one of the first things you'll see them do is grab something. Okay? Who taught them that? That was not learned behavior. That is pre-wired human behavior.
You know, you could take it even another step further when we're talking about the human brain, but if you took it to the whole of creation, like for animals, their brains, you know, they don't come into the world being taught for 18 years before the parents kick them out. You know, some of them don't even know the parents, you know, like the sea turtles or whatever. Maybe they just hatch and go directly. How do they know to go to the sea?
Exactly.
You know, how do they know what to eat once they get there? You know,
right.
Or you have some other. How's a deer know how to hide in hunting season? That's what. No, but
I tell you, they're pretty good at it.
yeah, but you know, like bears. You know, how do they know how to take care of their cubs? You know,
it's pre-wired.
It is.
You know, it's pre-wired in their brains. You know, how's the horse know how to walk the colt when it starts born?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. It's there.
Thousands of miles.
Exactly. You know, that information is pre-wired into those brains. It had to come from an intelligent source. It didn't come from dirt. Although our bodies actually will return to dust, there is a mental source. There is a mental source that these brains were programmed by. That this information that was pre-programmed into these bodies, into these brains came from, and that source was God. Any other comments or questions from anybody?
You know, to tie that into when you get to the DNA, that's where it all starts. At least, you know, when the human starts, or any of those animals, it starts in the DNA, and it's so specified that you get different things will start occurring. But it's all starts with that code. But I mean, you know, how do you go from a cell to having a brain that can do what you just said?
Exactly. How does that cell ever know how to replicate?
Exactly.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the comments and questions. We'll start next week talking about DNA a little bit.
Good job, Bob.
Good, how y'all doing?
Sure.